Oh, sorry. The member for Hunter. Sorry, the question is the bill be now read a second time and I call the member Palmer.
I'm with a super sub, Mr Deputy Speaker, a new addition to the speaking list. Let's be clear what this bill is all about, Mr Deputy Speaker. This bill is ideologically driven, and it underscores the key philosophical differences between those who sit opposite and those of us on this side of the House. And while I'm a super sub on the debate, Mr Deputy Speaker, I do note that the member for Patterson is an omission from the Speaker's list. Where is the member for Patterson?
Missing.
Could it be that the member for Patterson has worked out that speaking on this bill in support of the government proposition might be a bad thing for him in his electorate, particularly his new electorate, where he now, of course, faces an uphill battle against a resurgent Labor Party in the region and on boundaries which gives Labor a notional advantage. It's not too late for the member for Patterson to come on down and participate in this debate and explain to his constituents, both present and potentially future, why it is that he's about to ensure that this place abolishes Labor's legislated commitment to universal national wholesale pricing. We often have debates in this place which have a particular impact on rural and regional Australia. And I'll concede that sometimes there are merits on both sides of those debates. You can argue philosophically, ideologically, or in public policy terms which is the better approach, which approach will best serve rural and regional Australia. But in this case, Mr Deputy Speaker, there could be no debate. There could be no debate. This bill undermines the capacity of people living in rural and regional Australia to access the NBN at the same price as those living in our capital cities. We want to ensure that whether you're living in Cessnock or Maitland or Burnie in Tasmania or Armidale in the electorate of the Deputy Prime Minister, that if you live in one of those rural areas, you will get NBN at the same price as your city counterparts. This is a basic philosophical question. Some on the other side will no doubt say that no, the cap is still there on wholesale price and there's still a cap, but you'll be able to work under the cap. And this is where we differ. They think it's okay to let the market completely rip and let the market determine what the price impacts will be on consumers. I say something quite different. I say I too believe in the market, but that where there is clear market failure, government intervention is justified. And what is the market failure here? The market failure is distance and geography. And we want a country where those living in rural and regional Australia have the same opportunities as their city counterparts, for very many good reasons. But members of the government have to understand we don't want everyone living in our capital cities. We want to develop populations in rural and regional Australia. And to do that, you need to be able to provide services in rural and regional Australia. So there is a sound economic proposition here. Cross-subsidising delivery of services in rural and regional Australia is a good thing for all of Australia. And there could be no better example than this. The NBN can be a complex debate, I accept that, but people can grasp one thing very easily, and that is that it costs more to roll out a broadband service in the bush than it does in the capital cities, purely because of distance. But should people who live in rural and regional Australia be disadvantaged by that? Of course not. Of course not. They shouldn't be disadvantaged by geography, because if that's the approach we're going to take, if we're going to accept that as a basic proposition, we'll all be living in the capital cities, which of course is impossible. So this is good economic policy, it's good population policy, it's good building economic infrastructure policy. Now, those in the National Party who sit opposite like to often attempt at least to differentiate themselves from the Liberals, and I can understand that, Mr Deputy Speaker. But the fact is that time and time again they confirm for us in their actions, not so much their words in this place, but by their actions, that there is nothing between those who sit in this place under the Liberal banner and those who sit in this place under the banner of the Nationals. No. And there could be no better example than this, that their willingness to just roll over and accept this attack on universal wholesale pricing. And every resident in rural and regional Australia today should be making contact with their local member if he or she is a Conservative and asking them why they are doing this. Of course, they're already asking the even more important question in some senses: why is this government delivering a second-rate NBN service? Now, this is another simple policy proposition that I think people find it easy to grasp. I think they do understand the proposition that the now Prime Minister tried to put, and that is that it's cheaper to roll out the fibre just to the node and allow the service to be delivered by copper wire the extra distance to the premise. I think people understand that, and then it becomes a debate about whether the savings that might be involved there are worth it given the inferior quality of the NBN service they will receive because they're going across that copper network for the last mile. The problem is, of course, that even those who would support the proposition that it's an overbuild, if you like, to go all the way to the premise, or the cost is to justify it, will be shocked, absolutely shocked to learn that it's costing some $600-odd million to repair the copper wires.
Oh, what a joke.
$600-odd million to repair the copper wires. I must admit, Mr Deputy Speaker, I wasn't aware of that figure until I was preparing for this contribution. I was astounded, and I'm sure all Australians will be astounded. Those with investment in copper might be pretty happy about it, but it is just incredible that a government which said it would cost $55 million, I'm told, to fix up the copper, is going to spend $640 million on a 19th century technology.
Ridiculous.
I just cannot believe anyone would be so stupid, to be frank. It is a stupid proposition. We're going to have a second-class service. Everyone knows, no one would argue, not even the Prime Minister would argue, that fibre to the premises is not better. Of course they wouldn't. Fibre to the premise is better.
That's right.
Having a bit of copper along the line, it's like a chain. It's only as strong as its weakest link. Having copper in the chain makes it an inferior service. That's just a scientific fact, a technical fact. What we're really only arguing is whether you spend the additional money to provide the first-class service. Well, let's be clear. Labor believes in a first-class service.
Yeah.
Labor believes that everyone in rural and regional Australia, everyone in Australia, should get a first-class service. And we certainly don't believe that spending $640 million to retain a second-class service is a good economic proposition.
That's right.
It clearly is not. So I issue some challenges to the member for Braddon, the member for Bass, the member for Eden Monaro, the member for Page, and many, many others, the member for Hume, indeed the member for New England, none less than the Deputy Prime Minister. I often see Cabinet Ministers these days, Mr Deputy Speaker. You would have noted. Cabinet Ministers coming in here and talking in second reading debates in areas outside their portfolio responsibilities. Not very conventional, but they're doing it on a regular basis. Well, there's nothing to stop the Deputy Prime Minister from coming in this place.
Absolutely.
I'll make sure I don't sit down for another 5 minutes. I'm sure he can sprint from his ministerial office to the chamber in that time, to come down here and to justify why they are launching or joining in the launch of this direct attack on rural and regional Australia, why they are supporting the proposition of spending $640 million to repair a 19th century technology as part of their alternative NBN proposition. They need to come in here and explain themselves. And I could be wrong, but I think there probably will be an in-detailed stage of debate on this bill, so there are plenty of opportunities for them to come down and to explain themselves. Plenty of opportunity. Some of them are on the front bench now, but as I've said, that won't stop them from speaking. They have set the new precedent. They have set the new precedent, and they should be down here speaking on this bill. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, just some facts. The Prime Minister said his new proposal. Oh, here's the member for Patterson now. I welcome the member for Patterson, who I understand will now make a contribution to this debate. It's an interesting thing, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The member for Patterson's been crowing in his local media about the NBN rollouts in his local electorate. The fact is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, since his government took power, the rollout has been slower than it was under the former Labor government, and under his government the rollout has been inferior, because no doubt some of that $640 million the government is spending to repair copper is being spent in the electorate of Patterson. I hope the member for Patterson has done his research and he can tell the House how much of the $640 million on copper has been spent in the Patterson electorate. I suspect it's quite a bit, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I'll tell you why. Because I've had residents in the members of Patterson's electorate call me and say, I now have Malcolm Turnbull's NBN, Malcolm Turnbull's version, and it's slower than ASDL2. The system, the service people are receiving in rural and regional Australia under Malcolm Turnbull's plan, the Prime Minister's plan, is slower than they were enjoying under ADSL. Now, I can see the Minister at the table frowning, and I understand why he's frowning, because he can't believe that. You would not believe that a government could spend some $60 billion on a project that delivers an inferior service to the one they already had under ADSL. It is unbelievable, Minister. I can understand you frowning. Now, the member for Patterson has joined us, and I look forward to his attempt, at least, to justify why he is joining with his government on this proposition and why he has been prepared to just roll over and accept this inferior NBN and this $640 million investment in copper. But I'm still waiting for the member for Gippsland to come down. I'm still waiting for the member for Riverina. They can all speak on this bill. The members for Page, Eden Monaro, Bass, Braddon, the list goes on. All those who purport to represent rural and regional Australia, all those who are Nats who purport to be different than the Liberals, to be different from the member for Patterson, but go missing in action when they are required to be in this House defending the people they purport to represent. But it doesn't stop on this issue. We've seen in recent days and recent months their unpreparedness in a whole range of issues to defend rural and regional Australia. Their infrastructure rollout is hopeless, going backwards on what the former Labor government was doing. They like to crow about the inland rail build. They're spending less money, Mr. Deputy Speaker, than was the former Labor government. The reality is there is only one party in this place that stands up for rural and regional Australia on a regular basis, and that's the Australian Labor Party. And the member for Patterson, the member for Braddon, all those Tasmanian lower house members, including the member for Bass, as I said, the members for Eden Monaro and Page and others. I hope they've found the member for Page, because they couldn't find him in the building when we asked in Senate estimates for his report on cooperatives to be tabled. But they all need to be down here explaining why they're not defending their local residents. People living in rural and regional Australia deserve as good a service as their city cousins, and they should be in this place along with the member for Patterson. At least he's been prepared to front up. I'll give him credit for that, defending their local constituents.
I thank the member for Hunter.